Um, Hello, my name is Saketh Gajjala, and this is my visual thinking presentation. So my question was, is there such a thing as fate? Yes, there is such a thing as fate. Destiny is already written, whether we know it or not. However, the steps that we take to get from our destiny can be controlled by us, but we are not free from the path that was chosen before we were even born. The core text that I chose for this um, presentation were the novella by John Steinbeck of Mice and Men and the play by William Shakespeare, Macbeth. In the book of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, fate is inevitable because of the circumstances in which we live, and it is difficult to overcome them. The play Macbeth by William Shakespeare tells us that fate is based on how you approach certain situations, and based on how you approach them, your karma will reflect upon you, and that will determine your fate. Of Mice and Men is a story about two migrant workers, George and Lenny, who are trying to save money for a ranch. And the ranch is basically an allusion to heaven, but they face many challenges along the way, them and other characters as well. George has to deal with Lenny, who always gets into trouble, which causes them to lose their jobs and get run out of town. He has to deal with a mental disability, which impairs his ability to understand certain things and remember certain things. Andy is old and lost his hand, so he's basically useless at work, and he is on the end of his life, and he wants to enjoy the rest of it, but he can't because he's got nowhere to go. The impact of choices on the plot. Candy gave all his money towards buying the ranch because all 350 of the dollars that he had, and then George let Lenny keep the puppy when he promised that he'd get him a puppy, but Lenny, because of his strong hands, ends up killing the puppy on accident, and Lenny kills Curly's wife when he strokes her hair, and when she's overwhelmed by his strength, she starts to scream, and then fearing for punishment from George, he accidentally breaks her neck. In the end, Lenny's disability results in him being shot by George, which people like Curly and Carlson can't understand, but George's motive is understood by Slim when he says, "You hadda, George. I swear you hadda." Because Lenny would have never survived in this world, and he would have been killed by Carlson and Curly, and it would have been very painful. Candy never gets to settle down and feel unrestricted by a disability. So basically, he never gets to enjoy his retirement because he never gets to, get the ranch. And then George has to live with forever with the guilt that he killed his best friend. Immediately after he killed him, George shivered and looked at the gun, and these are clear signs of guilt because he felt that he had done something very wrong. And in the end, they never get their own ranch. And in the story Macbeth, the main character Macbeth faces very many challenges. His goal is to become the King of Scotland, but many people stand in his way. Such person is Banquo. Banquo's sons are destined to become kings, according to the witches who stated to Banquo, "Thou shalt get kings." Kings basically saying that his sons will later on become kings. And as Macbeth gets his power and becomes more and more of a tyrant, Macduff tries to unseat him, and the impact of choices on the plot. Macbeth killed Duncan in the beginning in order to become king. And Banquo is murdered by men hired by Macbeth, and Macbeth's wife and son are murdered after Macduff's wife and son are murdered after Macbeth declares to kill any living relative of Macduff. Macbeth goes to the witches for information regarding his fate. Um, in the Macbeth becomes a tyrant and corrupt with power. This is evident when Macduff states this in Act 5 by 4 when he says, "In nature it is a tyranny." As he continues to murder his enemies, he becomes very fearful and very paranoid. Um, and he dies in the end because he didn't take the warnings of the witches seriously enough. The witches told him that none of woman-born could have harmed him, but he never thought that um, anybody he knew wasn't woman-born, except that he didn't know that Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped, which basically means that Macduff was born of a C-section and wasn't really born of woman. And other texts and mediums that talk about the idea of fate. The poem "Because I Could Not Stop Her Death" by Emily Dickinson explores that the fate that everyone is destined to face death, and she faces it with like a casual tone. And then some different mediums such as film dive into this idea. The film American Psycho, it explores this theme in a similar way to Macbeth, but with like a different outcome. Challenges in Because I Cannot Stop Her Death is that the author is worried about the prospect of having to face death. Um, she also finds it very hard to let go of life and everything involved in it. Her anxiety is clearly stated when in the second stanza when she says, "We slowly drove. He knew no haste, and I had put away," showing that she was scared of moving on in life because she doesn't know what is out after life is done. And then the impact of her, she met death. She reminisces about the life she has, looking back on the good parts such as childhood and the parts where she's lonely, and um, by looking at a house that seemed a swelling of the ground, where the roof was scarcely visible, but the cornice but a mound. And what that basically means is that sometimes life didn't seem as good as it felt, and as a result, that sometimes it might be good to move on. And then she becomes content with moving on. In the end, she accepts her fate as she approaches death, and she surmised that the horses' heads were bound towards eternity, meaning her life will continue not in a physical body but her soul. In American Psycho, the main character, an investment banker named Patrick Bateman, faced a lot of challenges as well. Even though he had such a great life, Patrick hated most of his associates. He disliked his fiancée. He was very jealous. Impact of choices on Paul Allen, one of his associates, flaunted off his business card, which made Patrick very jealous. As a result, he murdered a homeless man and his cat, and he went on a murdering rampage and killed, as you can see, all these people. In the end, he believed he admitted his guilt to his lawyer, but then he finds out that all the crimes he committed never actually happened, and that was all in his head. And it's clear that that was probably the truth when he refers to himself as some kind of abstraction, an entity, something illusory. How does this all come together? Well, John Steinbeck said that fate is determined on the circumstances and how we respond to them. That based on how we respond to our circumstances, our fate is determined by karma, and because I Could Not Stop Her Death says that we should accept our fate because we're all going to end up in the same place, and that's basically death. And an American fate is written already, despite how badly we screw up. Like even if we murder a bunch of people, our fate, if our fate is to not go to prison, then our fate will still stay the same. So from this, we can surmise that our fate is already written. The path that we chose to get to our fate can be whatever we want it to, but in the end, our fate will end up the same.